Buffalo Bills fans of Built in Buffalo, what's going on? Welcome into your Saturday, May 4th edition of the Founders Pod. I am one of the founders of Built in Buffalo, Dave Myers, also known as DM3. And this handsome gentleman to my right is Kevin Massare, who is the host of the Going Deep Buffalo podcast live Wednesday nights on the Built in Buffalo network. Akeem's taking some time off, so I grabbed Kevin. I thought it'd be a great opportunity to spend some time with Kevin. And I know that the Going Deep Buffalo show is doing really well on the channel, growing seemingly every episode. Kevin, how's your Saturday treating you, man? What's going on?
Good, man. It's been a beautiful week, beautiful weekend. Glad to be back on the mic and to break down our topic of the day. It should be fun. So it's been great. Always good to leave with some Bills content for our weekend listeners, as it's a treat for sure.
Yeah, we're going to break down the Buffalo Bills wide receiver room. We have a plethora of topics, and talking to Kevin pre-show, this conversation is going to go probably down a few rabbit holes because this has been the hottest topic since seemingly the end of the season, leading into free agency. With the departure of Gabe Davis, heading into his huge contract with the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Bills signing Curtis Samuel, which I think a lot of Bills fans thought that he was going to be priced out of Buffalo. And then you had the departure of Stephon Diggs, which I think, Brandon Beane finally bit the bullet on that one. And that was a huge topic. And then we just had the draft. So a lot of things to talk about. We want to talk about Keon Coleman. We want to talk about Curtis Samuel. We want to talk about Khalil Shakir year 3. What does that look like? And the rest of the roster. And as Brandon Beane has been adding seemingly a free agent at least once a week. So I think to get everybody up to speed, because the Bills have added quite a bit of talent at the wide receiver position. Not huge flashy names, but the roster is full heading into trying to get to 90, heading into camp. So if you're not up to speed on everybody that the Bills have in the wide receiver room, and I'm going to preface this whole conversation with, we are not going to talk about tight ends unless absolutely necessary to talk about Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox. We understand that that's a huge part of the Bills passing game. I think that would be a different conversation for a different show. But if you're not familiar with the Bills roster as it's currently constructed here on May 4th, here is the list of Buffalo Bills wide receivers. Obviously, at the top, you have Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, Mac Hollins, who I do want to spend a few minutes on Mac Hollins because I think there is some really good value to having him on the roster. And then you kind of have everybody after that, I think, and Kevin will probably agree, is going to be fighting for 4 and 5. Quintez Cephas, KJ Hamler, Justin Shorter, Chase Claypool, which we're going to spend some time on, Tyrell Shavers, Andy Isabella, Xavier Johnson, Brian Thompson, and Lawrence Keys. So, Kevin, I'll ask you right off the top, because we're going to spend time on Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman. Of any of these other guys, do any of them stand out to you that could be, a player that you can kind of look at and say, this might have some legs to it. This might not just be a camp body. Any of those guys you think, kind of you have your eye on, kind of looking forward to heading into, spring camp here in a little bit?
Yeah, I think, the aforementioned Chase Claypool is very interesting. I think they signed him after the draft. I know there's some KJ Hamler love out there. I think it's really funny that, you have some individuals that are like, KJ Hamler, he's going to make it. He's had a raw deal. And then, they don't kind of consider that with any other player on the roster.
Yeah.
So I think Chase Claypool is the one that sticks to me as, if he comes in and is terrible, great. Like that, they just no harm, no foul. But I think he's got the biggest upside. I think he's got what it takes to be that receiver 5 and possibly receive some snaps. And they clearly are going with that bigger, faster, physical receiver. And I know it's, everyone's trying to make a mountain out of a molehill with the Brady offense. Maybe that's what he's looking for.
Yeah.
But I think Claypool, just the timing of it kind of sticks out. All the receivers being signed, OBJ, whether Tyler Boyd or not is signed, and a couple others. There's been some names that have gone off the board. Michael Gallup right after the draft. So I think that there is something to the fact of they selected who they wanted out of their pool of maybe rangy receivers. Maybe they think they can unlock something, but he's the guy I'm looking at right now. from a mishmash of receivers that has a chance to be that final spot on the roster.
It's kind of interesting. Every offseason, I feel like Brandon Beane talks about getting faster. They want to lengthen the field. They want that over the top deep threat. I feel like there's also another type that Brandon Beane likes. They're looking for what they wanted in Gabe Davis, that big body, because ultimately I feel like defenses are getting smarter. They're adjusting. They're playing too deep over the top safeties. And you can't just beat teams with speed. You have to have the contested catch 50-50 guy that Josh Allen seemingly has not had with the Buffalo Bills. And I'm not saying that, Chase Claypool is going to be that guy. I'm not saying that Justin Shorter is going to be that guy. I am saying, however, possibly that Keon Coleman body type might be that guy. He's got some speed. He's not just going to torch you down the field. But if you watch anything from what he was able to do in college, Florida State, for example, a lot of 50-50 balls he came down with. And it seems like whenever that was the case with Gabe Davis, he wasn't physical enough. And I'm not knocking Gabe Davis, because if you look at Gabe Davis's production in Buffalo, he scored a ton of touchdowns. I think he scored 29 touchdowns in 4 years. That's a ton of touchdowns, but I don't think he was the guy that they drafted. They wanted the guy that was going to be able to just let Josh throw the ball and you go get it, right? So we can start off with the topic of Keon Coleman. And I have a graphic like, who is Keon Coleman, right? Who exactly? I mean, he's just 20 years old. So he's got a ton of time to, like Brandon Beane. I was watching some of the snippets that they put out of the embedded that's going to be coming out this week, where he's not even legally able to drink yet. He's still growing. He's still growing into his body. He's going to continue to add muscle. He's going to continue to add maybe a little bit more length. So your initial reactions of first off, we'll talk about your initial reactions to the pick that the Bills made, and then maybe dive a little bit deeper into who you think Keon Coleman actually is as a receiver and what he can bring to the Bills.
Yeah, I think Keon Coleman was a guy that I wanted early on in the process. I didn't know that he'd be the archetype the Bills were looking for. That was the issue I had with Keon Coleman. But it may be a new style that Josh Allen's looking for. He thinks that he has the quick twitch, get open players in Curtis Samuel and Khalil Shakir. And possibly, we'll see how that roster develops in that front. But I think he wanted a different style of receiver. And if they didn't, they would have got Lad McConkey, who went one pick later. So totally different players, totally different styles. I think the proof was there. They could have stayed and taken Lad McConkey. They could have taken Worthy. Bean can say whatever he wants. He well knew who Kansas City was interested in, just like he knew who Carolina was interested. So if he had liked Worthy or Leggett, he's not making minor trade backs to lose the player that he wanted. So it's possible that maybe he had them all ranked very similarly, from Lad to Keon to Worthy, and was fine with any of the 3 or 4 of them. So that, I guess, is possible. But I doubt if he preferred one over the other, he would have done those minor trade backs, especially with Carolina for sure. He wouldn't have let Leggett go. And I just didn't like Leggett's production. I think he's got a chance to be good. But I just overall was a 1-year player. I know he ran into some injuries, wasn't on the top of my personal draft board. I think Keon Coleman fits the personality. He's just a contested catch guy. His rate wasn't great, but his quarterback play wasn't good either.
Right.
So I think it's a matter of a couple of different factors. He played much better at Florida State than he did at Michigan State. So I think it's just a good fit. Is super athletic. The not getting open thing is totally overblown. The 40 times totally overblown because he has all the other athletic traits. So ultimately speaking, I was impressed by it. Ultimately, I was thinking Lad McConkey, just due to their nature and who they fit. That's really who I thought would be the pick, especially after they traded back. I was pretty sure that it was going to be Lad McConkey. And I don't think that they were going to wait till their second round. I think they always kind of planned to take Cole Bishop there. So I think that this pick was always destined for receiver. And to me, it was McConkey and Coleman 1-1. They went right after each other. And I think he's a new archetype here. And I think Bills fans will be impressed by having a pure X receiver.
I think too, you talk about Leggett and his production. There was some injury issues. There was obviously quarterback play. I think if you look at the three, you talk about McConkey, you talk about Coleman, and you talk about Leggett, I think the Bills they could have ended up with either the top two of those three, because I think either of those guys is more NFL ready, if that sounds kind of cliche, but because of more experience in college. McConkey absolutely is. He's a guy that you could plug him in right now, and I feel like whatever Brady wanted to dial up, he would fit right in. But Coleman is interesting to me because I don't read a lot into what happened last year with, Josh Allen texting Bean, Dalton Kincaid, and I don't really read too much into what has been said about, how much Josh Allen wanted Coleman this year, affecting what Brandon Bean wanted to do draft day. I think there's a little bit of conversation, and it maybe sways him a little bit to make his guy comfortable. But to me, what sealed it for me was going back, because everybody talks about the speed, right? Everybody has been talking about this. He doesn't have the breakaway speed, but if you watch him return punts, that's the thing, avoiding contact and being able to get out into space where he can you're not going to catch him if he gets past you. And I think there's the whole, rack concept. There's all this other stuff. He's a big body guy. I feel like, to me, this, I don't think he's wide receiver one. And we're going to talk about if the Bills have an alpha receiver. I don't necessarily think this offense needs, and this is, like I said, we're going to go down rabbit holes because there's so many different directions we can take this conversation. I don't think the Bills need that Stephon Diggs type of receiver. I think it would be amazing to have, Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson. Any team would take them. But I think to be successful this year is just pick up where you left off last year, right? Josh needs to find the open guys, and we need to get guys the ball and able to do things after they have the ball in their hands. So I'll ask you this question. Do the Bills need an alpha receiver? Do they need the X, the one, this guy's a true number one? Do they need that? Because there's all the talk out there. It seemed, and Brandon Bean even said it in his presser, like, look, the Bills are linked to every big name guy that comes available. Do the Bills need to have an alpha, not just this year, but going forward in the future? What do you think?
I think so. So I am going to be in that camp of yes. I think they can try to claim they're going to replace Davis and Diggs' production with a cast of players. I think that's what they tried to go away from in 2018 and 2019 when they made the trade for Diggs. I think things are cyclical, so they may seem like they can fill in the gap. But ultimately speaking, I think you have Keon Coleman, who's going to be at least to start with, in my opinion, hopefully a high-end receiver too. But they are looking. I wouldn't be shocked. There's smoke, there's fire around the Debo rumors. I do believe that they're looking for a receiver one. I'm not. The 10.2 million's coming. Bean can say whatever he wants about the June 1st money. Yeah. I just think that to be competitive, they need the alpha. The rookie class already not having a first-round pick this year by trading back. It isn't going to cost. It's going to cost them about $2 million on the cap. Yeah. They can afford that now. The $10 million is very much so could be utilized in a trade. And the Bills have the 2025 picks. They showed their hands by trading Diggs for a 2025 pick, by trading a 5th round for a 4th round this year. So it just matters how high are they talking. Are they looking at a Cortland Sutton? Will they go low end like a Terrence Marshall? Or will they go higher end like some of the guys we've all talked about? Yeah. For me, I think they do need an alpha. I think they put one player away from that room actually being good. So you put that player in with Khalil Shakir and Keon Coleman, as well as Curtis Samuel and a little bit of Mac Hollins, and maybe if a couple of Justin Shorter can show up or Chase Claypool. But I think I think they could use an alpha. And it's like the style of player doesn't bother me as much, Dave, but it's a matter of I think they need what would be considered a receiver one, whether it's a player like Debo, like it's a player like Brandon Ayuk, like it's someone DK Metcalf. But I think that somebody could arise at some point for the Bills from June to August.
I was about a month ago, well, maybe 3 weeks. It was a little bit, maybe probably a week or two leading into the draft. I was pounding the table for DK Metcalf. I think he's a generational talent. I think, say what you want about Geno Smith, I'm not sure distributing the ball. I'm not sure he's the right guy. I just a DK Metcalf it's a generational receiver, and I don't know, as far as it's just I'm torn, man, because I a lot of what Brandon Beane said about the draft and what he was going to do, it wasn't smoke after all, right? And we feel like Brandon Beane is the king of smoke screens. I feel like every year, you look back at the Von Miller signing. We're not doing anything. And then he goes and gets Von Miller, right? He went from trying to sign Emmanuel Sanders to trading for Stephon Diggs, right? Like there's like complete opposites. One guy's on the end of his career. Yes, he ultimately got Emmanuel Sanders the next year, but he went from one end of the spectrum to bringing in a guy who, just set the Bills, records on fire. Like for 4 years, he was the guy. So I don't know. Like there's a few guys I'm concerned with how much Brandon Beane did this offseason to fix the future salary cap, to just be put back in a similar situation, paying Josh. You're going to have to, if you get Metcalf, if you get Justin Jefferson, or even a Cortland Sutton, like you're paying $20+ million to a receiver when, that money's got to go somewhere else if you want a high-end edge rusher, right? I mean, there's players out there like Justin Jefferson has said he wants to be the second highest paid player on whatever team he plays for. He's said that. So I don't know. It's concerning because how much pressure is out there for Brandon Beane to do, this, to get this window of Josh Allen, peak Josh Allen, his guy for the next 4 or 5 years. I don't know if he thinks too much into that, or if he's just trying to do, the right thing by the salary cap in the future and stuff like that. So I don't know. I mean, it's tough to tell because let me ask you this, if that doesn't happen, okay, and we start training camp, we start preseason, and this is the Bills wide receiving roster as constructed, how do you feel going into the season with who's on the roster? Obviously, we can talk about, and we're going to talk about the 4 and 5 receiver and who's going to be in competition for that. But how do you feel if your top 3 guys are Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakir, and Curtis Samuel? How do you feel if that's what we head into week 1 with?
I think it's below average. I mean, I think to be fair, I don't think it's. Look, you can convince yourself that it's serviceable.
Yeah.
I think they needed a receiver prior to Diggs being traded. I would have targeted Keon Coleman. Still would have been a good player to have. And it's tough to remember that Diggs isn't on the team. So Diggs, Keon Coleman, Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, good. That is a great to good 4-pack.
Yeah.
As is, it's going to be tough for me if they don't make a move there to consider that. I would consider that their weakness. One injury away too. They face injuries at other positions from being super raw. I mean, if Shakir or Samuel goes down, I mean, there's not a lot there. So, I mean, ultimately you're rostering Shakir. But if he's hurt, sheesh. You're talking about trying to play shorter, Claypool getting real snaps, Matt Collins. So ultimately, I prefer the route that they do something, even if it's mediocre, medium of the road, I think would then elevate that unit a lot. But keeping it as is tough for me if the last move there is Quintez Cephas and Chase Claypool. I just don't think it's good enough. In my opinion, with weapons, no, they obviously have a better running back room and a better tight end room, but I am nervous all the way around of that receiver room, especially if anything was to happen to the 3 that you mentioned.
Yeah, you talk about Chase Claypool. Is it intriguing to you at all that the Bills have had conversations with OBJ and seeing the contract he got with the Dolphins was $3 million guaranteed, and it's got a value of up to $8 million with incentives,
Mm-hmm.
and the Bills went with Chase Claypool? Are you at all confused by that move? Do you think it's just they've kind of moved on from OBJ and they're kind of over the whole, watching what he was able to do somewhat with the Ravens last year, and he's a year older. You can say he hasn't really been good since, I don't know, 2019, 2020-ish, and then the injuries started happening. So what's your take on, seeing the Bills get Chase Claypool and then the Dolphins immediately sign OBJ, very shortly after? Like, what was your take on that? Is it the body type thing again? Like, are we looking for a guy who maybe he can bite the bullet and say, look, I'll contribute on special teams. I can help block. I'm a big body. He's almost 240 pounds. He's a big boy. So maybe going bigger, stronger type deal. Like, what's your thoughts?
I think the OBJ talk is interesting because I think the way that that's structured, we'll see if they kick money into future years or how they exactly structure it, because they didn't have any money. They were similar to the Bills with their salary cap situation. So I'm not for sure how that deal is going to work and what likely to be earned, not likely to be earned, how easy are those incentives hit. I would imagine that wasn't it said, I don't know if it was officially, wasn't it said by a reporter and or somebody that the Bills were interested? I don't know 100%, but I thought that was the original report that the Bills were at least in on the discussion.
Yeah, I think something came out last week saying that it was like maybe Tuesday, Wednesday, saying that there was open dialogue. Nothing confirmed. It was a couple sources, put out there that there was open dialogue again.
Maybe he wanted to be in Miami too.
Yeah, right? And that's when there's no state tax, so you never know. He's hitting the end of his career, so maybe he's trying to get as much as possible. But it started with Vaughn came out, probably something was posted on Instagram or something, and then it was confirmed that the Bills had conversations. But anyways, back to what you were saying.
Yeah, I mean, maybe like ultimately, he wanted to go to Miami, and I think that the Bills maybe had a price. And here, I'm going to go down swinging on this one. I think they have a plan at receiver, and are saving their money. They don't mind adding Chase Claypool. He's vet minimum. The difference there could be $2 to $3 million difference that the Bills could then use for a player. They're willing to take anybody around the 1.5 or less number. So I think that that's first and foremost. They're going to stockpile those guys. But I just think that there was too much smoke around. Yes, being kind of puts it out by saying, of course, any receiver available, we're in on it. But they were in on it, though. Yeah. That's the thing to take away. Okay, sure, maybe right. That's true, but you were in on it. So you like Deebo Samuel, and I think they wanted those bigger body types like Chase Claypool, Matt Collins, Keon Coleman, because they may be looking at a Tyler Lockett or a Deebo Samuel. I think there's smoke, there's fire. The Bills wanted to trade Tpics next year. They have the money next year to pay him a bigger salary, and they have the $10 million coming from Trey White. I kind of buy it. I'm buying the fact that the Bills are shopping and may or may not have someone in mind. You're never going to take me off San Francisco double dipping at receiver while having Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel. Not buying it. There's smoke. There's smoke there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, if you had your druthers, right? If you had your pick of the guys, and obviously this goes into age, this goes into body style, this goes into injury history, this could go into potential contracts. Because I don't think Ayuk is getting moved. I think Deebo is the guy that they're looking to move. But so Deebo, Justin Jefferson, Cortland Sutton, who was the other one that you had mentioned? Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf. Which of these guys, with all that stuff that I mentioned, do you feel like would be the best fit? And it has to be, injury history, age, contract wise, body type, physical aspects. Like, which of those guys is the perfect fit?
I mean, I like Brandon Ayuk, right? He's the perfect fit for me. I think, though, there's too many factors between the compensation. You already mentioned a $20 million plus receiver, a couple of the other things. I don't know how realistic that matter, that all is all combined into one. And that would go with Jefferson. You could put in that camp.
Yeah.
You could put in anyone at that level or better. I would say just doesn't make sense. But unfortunately, the guy I'm actually going to give you as a realistic is probably Deebo Samuel. I think that he checks the box. That's why they were looking for the bigger, rangier receivers. But a Deebo Samuel does match up what they would want to do with Brady, what they could do with him in the backfield. You could also be creative and make San Francisco take some of that salary where you can't with guys on their fifth-year options like Jefferson and Brandon Ayuk. Cortland Sutton and Deebo Samuel make sense to what they're trying to do. And I think that ultimately with the body types they already have, I think they're going heavy on those for a reason, because they may be more interested in a player like Deebo Samuel, and maybe the cost value matches up there for what he'd be looking at. And it just kind of works for maybe what they would consider to be a dealable contract. And I think that the double dip with San Francisco makes sense. It all does line up to what the Bills could be looking for alongside Keon Coleman and those Mac Hollins. I think it does make sense to maybe go with a guy that's super versatile, and hence why they may have passed on guys like Troy Franklin and Xavier Worthy. Too much lines up to be. He's not. I'm not saying he's my number one, but too many line up to be that style of player to where the Bills would want to add that to make that a very strong unit.
That makes a lot of sense. All right, before we continue, if you guys are watching us on YouTube, please smash that like button. We got over 300 people on all platforms combined, so smash the like button. If you guys are joining us for the first time, thank you, welcome, subscribe. Make sure you do smash the like button. If you're watching on Facebook, smash the like, share this. If you're watching on X, please comment, share this, repost it. But always comment. We love the comments. As the show's going on, the comments are starting to roll in between all three platforms. All right, Kev. Let's move on to Curtis Samuel. I think that Curtis Samuel in the offseason was the darling of a lot of Bills fans. I think he was a guy that we all looked at, the connection to Joe Brady. You know, we thought back when he was with the Panthers, we thought that he was a guy that the Bills could bring in. Salary could probably work, knowing what the Bills had to work with. What's your initial thought process, not only of who Curtis Samuel is, what receiver type he is, where he could fit in this system? Is he undervalued as a wide receiver in the NFL based off of previous, all that stuff? Just kind of break down Curtis Samuel for me and what your initial thoughts are on how he fits in the Bills offense.
I think that he can do a lot of different things. So he's going to be a player that will play a multitude of positions. He's going to bounce in and out. I always have called him, for right or wrong, an upgrade of what they were looking for with Deontay Hardy, who just wasn't able to handle it. He wasn't able to figure out different route tree. He wasn't able to figure out where to line up. He was struggling in structure. So the Bills went out and said, all right, we're going to actually take Hardy, cut him, and we're going to make an upgrade to that style of player. So I think he's going to play all around the offense. And yeah, I mean, he's played with a plethora of poor quarterbacks. Wasn't my first free agent target, Dave. If I'm being honest, I thought they could have utilized a couple of other free agents if they were willing to spend some money, but I have to give him the fact that he had his best year with their with their offensive coordinator in Joe Brady. Yeah. So ultimately it makes sense. The Bills are upgrading that player that they always seem to want to have, like Jamison Crowder. They're trying to elevate that third to fourth receiver spot. So they did. They kept trying to find it. I think that was an elevation from a Hardy or from a Crowder when they were looking for those individual players. So I do give them credit for upgrading, whether you want to call it receiver 3 or 4. At this stage, though, receiver 3. And I think he's going to be a fairly competitive guy, a guy that's going to get open and going to make sense with Josh because he does have some elite traits. So it's going to be fun to see if he can do what he's supposed to be doing most of his career. And we start to say, is he as good as he is? Or is he just not that? He has a quarterback and maybe he just isn't that player. But I'm interested to see what he's able to do because I think he's a strong, able-bodied receiver who can get open with a quick twitch. He's good off the line. He's going to cause some mismatches for other teams' nickel and second corners.
Yeah, you talked about the quarterback play. I have it right here. Curtis Samuel's career quarterbacks. Cam Newton, this was more towards the end of Cam Newton with Carolina. Still serviceable, not horrible. But then he went, he had Tyler Heineke, Kyle Allen, Will Greer, Teddy Bridgewater, PJ Walker, Garrett Gilbert, Fitzy, Carson Wentz when he was not Carson Wentz of the Eagles, Sam Howell, Jacoby Brissett. No knock on any of these quarterbacks, but none of these quarterbacks are Josh Allen. So I think that it was an interesting guy to bring in because of the similar traits that I really like in Khalil Shakir. You talk about slot all you want. Me and Akeem talked about Curtis Samuel for probably 45 minutes on one of our shows. Curtis Samuel is actually a really good outside receiver. I don't know if he's been kind of boxed in to that slot role because I think he can do both. So I think it's going to be interesting to see where Joe Brady views him. Does he view him a slot guy when you have a Khalil Shakir and we weren't going to talk about him, but we have a Dalton Kincaid who can do what you're asking of a slot guy to do. But you bring up the speed. He still has under 4.4, we'll call it under 4.4-ish speed. So they'll be able to do some things I think that they tried to establish with Isaiah McKenzie. I don't want to call him a gadget guy, but you can do some of the stuff to kind of keep defenses honest. Plus he's a rack guy, right? You get him the ball underneath, which there's a huge theme to what the Bills have started to do the last 2 years. Obviously, Khalil Shakir can do that. Dalton Kincaid can do that. You got James Cook, who had 50-plus receptions last year. They're going to want to start letting Josh distribute the ball differently than what we've seen in previous Josh Allen seasons. Doesn't mean they're not always looking for the deep threat. Doesn't mean that they're not looking for a contested catch guy like we talked about with Keon Coleman. I think that they're looking to do kind of like what the Miami Dolphins do, kind of like what the Kansas City Chiefs have been successful doing over the years. Just let your playmakers catch the ball, do what they do best, and get yards after catch. Because I think since Cole Beasley has left, they've been trying to find that guy that can be that 3rd and 7, and he'll get you 10 yards. Or, that guy that if you need a couple extra yards to get into field goal range or whatever it is, extend drives, that's what they're looking for. So with that being said, let's talk about Khalil Shakir for a minute, because I see so many different opinions by content creators on what Khalil Shakir actually is. I've been on the Khalil Shakir bandwagon and couldn't believe he fell to the 5th round when the Bills drafted him. I was all over him in that whole draft process. I thought he was one of the best receivers in that draft class. I thought that his rookie season, he was going to be just blowing us away with what he could do. He wasn't utilized. I'm not sure if there were things that he just wasn't picking up in practice. As the season progressed, he got more and more reps down the stretch. And then this past year, when Brady took over, I felt like he made it a point to get Shakir involved more. So I'll ask you, what do we expect from Khalil Shakir in year 3? He was, as we saw, one of the most reliable targets for Josh down the stretch last year. Definitely in the postseason. I thought he had one of the most productive postseasons from a Bills receiver in the 2 games the Bills played. And he had the 2 touchdowns, that amazing catch that he had against the Chiefs. And then I firmly believe if Josh doesn't get hit, Khalil Shakir's wide open in the end zone. That's another touchdown right there. We're talking about that for a while. But what's your expectations, I guess? What do you realistically think is going to happen? And what's Khalil Shakir's role in the Bills offense this year?
He's an interesting. I know people are ready to say he's 1,000+ yard receiver. I've liked him too coming out. I thought very much so, just like the Bills with Van Pran Granger this year, where he was the 3rd center on the board, in my opinion. Could start at some point, definitely next year, but maybe even this year. But Shakir was kind of in that camp for me early on, and I think he does a lot well. So will he make that jump in his 3rd year? That's the ultimate question. I think he makes a jump, but I don't know that I'm ready to. I mean, I think he's a slot receiver, and that's the problem. That's the problem that I have. So here's what I think. I think Shakir is going to elevate and be the full-time slot. And you're going to have potentially a Keon Coleman for Gabe Davis swap. You still need to have that one on the other side. And Curtis Samuel is definitely an upgrade from Deontay Hardy, as I mentioned. And then Matt Collins is an upgrade from, in my opinion, from Sherfield.
Yeah.
So you have a good amount of upgrades going on here. It's just going out and acquiring that last receiver. I do think he's going to have full-time slot production, though. To your original question, 850 and 6 touchdowns sounds about right. I think he's going to be a nice upgrade from like a prime Cole Beasley for the Bills offense. And I think he's going to draw that slot attention. Obviously, you're going to have Dalton Kincaid running on the field too. But it does help the Bills to have those 2 tight end sets and 12 personnel. What will the Bills do in that 12 situation? Are they going to have the 2 tight ends? Keon Coleman obviously makes sense in a 12 situation, but they're going to need a blocker in there. So will it be Shakir? I don't know if it can be Samuel. Will it be Mac Hollins in some of those situations? It might be maybe why they're looking for bigger bodied, faster receivers because of 12 personnel.
My thought too with the Ken Dorsey offense and maybe why Shakir wasn't used as much, because when Brady took over, and this is why it gets really interesting. Again, this is a rabbit hole conversation. So when Brady took over, the offense was different. We can all agree on that. I don't think it's his full play. It was his full playbook, but the offense felt and looked different. Obviously, they let Josh be a little bit more Josh of the past, where I think Dorsey kind of locked some things in. Obviously, the Bills ran the ball more. But what's interesting is you mentioned 12 personnel, right? And we will always compliment Gabe Davis for how good of a blocker he was, right? We will always say that Gabe Davis was an exceptional blocker. I think he was an exceptional blocker. I really do. Maybe that's why Shakir didn't see the field under Ken Dorsey in his rookie year, in the beginning of last year, because he wasn't capable of being that guy that can go out there and push somebody around. I know that sounds weird and crazy, and probably I'm overanalyzing it too much, but down the stretch, the Bills didn't use this. Do you feel like the Bills used less 12 personnel under Joe Brady last year than Ken Dorsey?
I think the numbers do point to a similar nature of 12, especially because don't forget Knox came back toward the end of the year last year. Right. So I would bet percentages may have ticked up actually. And that's really hence the downfall to some of Diggs's numbers as well.
I just look at I felt like there was times when Kincaid just there was no production there at all. And I don't know if that's specific, obviously could be specific game planning against whatever team you're playing, whatever defense they're throwing out there, but
they ran more.
Yeah, exactly. So Kalil Shakir, to me, I love the guy. I feel like the production we got from him last year was, I don't think anybody expected it. I think that we all thought, because Gabe Davis was out, right? He was dealing with injuries going into the postseason. I think we felt like Khalil Shakir was going to be a slot guy, and he was just going to get a few targets. But what sold it for me was a couple of the plays that it was all athleticism. It was all Khalil Shakir. It wasn't just, hey, I'm going to throw the ball, just go catch it. Like the play against the Jets, where I think it was like 85 yards. The catch against the Steelers in the postseason, like ridiculous bend motion to get back to score that touchdown. So I'm not one of those that thinks he's going to have 1,000 yards. I'm with you. I think 60 receptions ish, 65, 600 yards, about a 10-yard average for a slot receiver. 5, 6, 7 touchdowns. Because again, what are you doing with Dalton Kincaid? I don't think Dalton Kincaid was drafted to be a tight end. He was drafted to be a pass catching player who has elite hands. We don't expect him to be an elite blocker. We expect Dawson Knox to be a really good to elite blocker at some point in his career. So it's going to be really interesting. I just hope that the progression continues. The big thing I like from Khalil Shakir's, it's the targets equal production. It's not that you don't have to worry about the drops. You don't have to worry, about anything after the catch. He's going to get you what you want. He's going to make plays in space, and I think you can't ask for much more than that. So let's talk about Chase Claypool. You touched on him for a minute, but let's talk about Chase Claypool, because again, there's been a lot of smoke on social media about people that are being a little bit negative towards the signing, saying that if this was, or when the Dolphins signed him last year, we laughed at the Dolphins. Like if this was another team signing him, we would have laughed at them, but now it's the Bills. So we're saying it could be one of those things where he's had poor quarterback play or just give him a chance and all this stuff. Let's break down Chase Claypool. We know that he had 9 touchdowns as a rookie, right? I mean, kind of out of nowhere. I like Chase Claypool during the whole draft process coming out. I'm a Notre Dame guy, so I thought that it would be something for the Bills to look at. Big body guy. I don't think that he's elite by any means, but what's your take on this signing now going into his 4th team in what, 4 years, 5 years now since 2020? So 4th team, 5 years. Is this a camp body? Is this a low risk, medium reward? Like what is Chase Claypool at this point right now?
I think that the Bills generally don't go this route with some of these has-beens often, and they definitely don't make the team. I mean, they've tried out, like, think of the pass underneath McDermott and I guess Bean to some of these receivers who have had some success in the past and they never end up making the roster, right? Yeah. So, like, they tried Percy Harvin. They've tried some of these style of players, and I just don't know. The WVU receiver they tried. Who am I thinking of? Just 2 years ago.
Oh, I don't know, but I mean, they tried Anquan Bolden.
Sure.
And he retired.
One. Yep.
I mean, typical Bolden. similar style.
Traded for Jordan Matthews.
Right.
Similar.
Kelvin Benjamin.
Two pass productive players.
Right.
They rostered those guys. So to me, like, the 9'8" Raz is interesting. Like, he's athletic. A lot of people are like, he's a slow receiver. He's very much not. He's a super athletic receiver that the Bills hope that they can put it together. So they take these calculated flyers on some of these athletic, were good in the past type of players. Generally, it's the UDFA that the Bills won't generally roster. They don't. Yeah. Occasionally at different spots, not very often will they go.
Yeah.
And these high value UDFAs that stick out in a training camp game, in the red and blue practice, or in preseason game 3. They just, shorter, even they punted on. Shavers had a moment or two last year, in preseason especially, and they just don't generally roster those rookies. So I think the antithesis to that is a Chase Claypool. I think he's got a realistic shot to make the roster. He can easily be beat up by Justin Shorter. That's no doubt. But I think that, especially if that move doesn't come, the trade move we talked about earlier, he has a real chance with that athletic profile and what he's able to do in a full year in this system. I think could make sense if he can put in the effort. But if he shows up and he's not the same player that he was early on with Ben Roethlisberger, that's it. He is going to the CFL.
That's funny. He's got some history with Mitch Trubisky too that not a lot of people actually think about. So there's a little bit, not that
hopefully
Mitch
you can vouch for him.
Yeah, maybe. That's what I'm saying. So I mean, and I know that Brandon Beane values guys that he's brought into the system, like a Mitch Trubisky, who, same thing with like Matt Barkley, like, who was here, left, came back, and has seen that the grass isn't greener on the other side. So he's come back into a stable environment. Then he's going to ask these guys and pick their brains about, hey, what's his work ethic like? Like, what's he like to be around? Like, what's he like off the field? Like, all this type of stuff. And I'm not saying there's long-term plans for Chase Claypool, because, like you mentioned, we don't even know what Justin Shorter is. Like, what is Justin Shorter on the field? Because we haven't seen it. And I think for a year now, Bills Mafia has been trying to figure out exactly who this guy is. He's a big receiver that would be a big target, can get contested catches. He's got great tape from college, but we don't know who he is. And I had this conspiracy theory that the Bills didn't want to put him on the practice squad, and they IR'd him last year because they wanted to give him a year of development.
Yeah.
And he wasn't injured. They just IR'd him, said, we're not making him eligible for the practice squad for another team to come and take him. He's genetically gifted. He's a freak athlete that we can try to mold into something that we might be able to use. And he's the body type that they want. But then again, they brought in a Mac Hollins. They signed a Chase Claypool. They brought in guys that with similar, builds and size. So that makes me concerned about what actually is Justin Shorter, if it's going to come to fruition this year. So it's crazy. So I'm going to put the Bills wide receiver roster up again, because I want to talk about who you think is going to actually have a legitimate shot And if you would have looked at this list like 3 or 4 years ago, it would be crazy that some of these names are on the Bills wide receiver, possibly not even making the team list. So the guys, I think, Lawrence Keys, Brian Thompson, Terrell Shavers, Xavier Johnson, I think those are practice squad guys through and through. I think the guys that are going to be fighting for number 5, because I honestly think that Mac Hollins is a roster lock. I think what he brings special teams wise and what they lost in that leadership on special teams this offseason, I feel like that would make him just a McDermott dream come true, and he makes the roster. I don't think it's like a Jake Kumaro signing. I don't think you're rostering him to get much production on the offensive side of the ball. You're getting him to kind of be a leader on the special teams aspect, especially after a down year for the Bills and special teams. KJ Hamler, Andy Isabella, Chase Claypool, Justin Shorter, and Quintez Cephas. Are these guys, which of these guys do you think have a legitimate shot at making this roster? Honestly, in your honest opinion.
I would say for the reason you just mentioned, probably Justin Shorter. I'm not in the camp that he's amazing. He's going to be the guy, like he's this and that. That's not where I'm at. But for the special teams potential ability of being a gunner, I think does give him a separation ability to make this roster. They like Shavers on special teams too. So he's not my favorite guy in this list. But I think he has a real chance to make the roster as well. But as it sits right now, it's probably definitely with no moves being made, let's say. It's definitely Justin Shorter. They stashed him for a reason. He's their 5th round pick. They've gotten a lot out of Shakir as a 5th round pick. They've been successful in the 4th and 5th rounds with their players. If he looks good, I think it's Shorter has if no moves are made on the Bills roster anywhere at the receiver position, Justin Shorter does have the inside track to make the roster. And Chase Claypool. Those are the 2 to me that I think have a legitimate chance to be the final roster spots. I just don't see anything from Isabella. I don't see anything from Shavers. It just doesn't. I don't know what Cephas is. I see Quintez Cephas is a perfect example of someone that comes on, has a play in preseason. Everyone's like, maybe you'll make it. Then you never hear from him again. But I think Claypool and Shorter have legitimate ability to make this roster, and Shavers with an outside chance. But Shavers is just going to be a prototypical practice squad. Like he is destined for the practice squad in Shavers. So I think it's Shorter, and I think it's Claypool. Those are the guys that have a real chance at this moment right now to make the roster.
So you think how many do you think they rostered? 6? Think they go 6 this year?
They don't. They went 6 to start with, and then immediately put Shorter on IR. Yeah. So if there's an IR situation, maybe I don't. Not with this weak unit. I'm sorry. It's not. I don't want to call it weak, but it's not a huge strength. I don't think they need to get crazy. They may need that roster spot elsewhere. I'm thinking 5. I'm going to go with 5.
You're going to go with 5 because a lot of people don't think about it. I think the way that you and me probably think about it the same. Like a wide receiver to make to make this roster. If you're a fringe guy, you're going up against a 9th defensive lineman or a 10th offensive lineman or a 6th or 7th linebacker, because those are the guys that can give you depth other ways instead of saying, I'm just a one-trick pony. I catch passes. Like we got to think about the special teams aspect. We have to think about how much, Sean McDermott plays linebackers and how much he plays defensive ends and defensive tackles. And Brandon Beane, I think, will always have the Bills roster at least 10 offensive linemen, just because of the history this team has with injuries and just in the NFL in general. KJ Hamler to me, I've seen a couple comments come through. KJ Hamler to me is intriguing. And here's the weird thing. If the Bills can get something, and I know this is throwing something at the wall and see if it sticks, but if the Bills can get something out of KJ Hamler and Chase Claypool, wouldn't that be just magical? Like throwaways and discards from other teams, and they come to Buffalo. Not saying they're going to have these huge, massive, but they contribute to the team. I think they're going to roster 6. And if it was me, obviously the locks are Coleman, Samuel, Shakir. And this is if they don't make a move and go and trade somebody else for somebody else. Right. I think it's those 3. And then I think Justin Shorter makes this roster. I think that they want to see what they have I think that Chase Claypool makes the roster. I don't know what it is. I just feel like there's something there. And then like if you look at the last of the list here, I honestly think that KJ Hamler might have a chance of making this roster. I don't see anything from Cephas. I don't see anything from Shavers. Xavier Johnson is kind of intriguing as well. I do like his tape, but then Brian Thompson and Lawrence Keys, I think those are just practice squad guys. So I'm going to go with 6. I think they're going to go with 6.
Okay.
That's my stance on it. So if there's no players added, who leads this Bills team in receiving this year?
From the receiver position?
Yeah, from the wide receiver position, because I'm going to tell you that Dalton Kincaid's going to lead this team in receptions. That's just he's probably going to get 125 targets at least. But from this wide receiver position, who do you think is the guy the Bills look back on and say that was our guy this season? Or is it going to be a collective effort?
It's definitely going to be a collective effort as of right now. But who's actually, to answer the question, who's going to lead it? Maybe it's by 50 yards. Maybe it's by 30. I'm going to go with the receiving yards from the receiver position. Maybe because of the slot presence, Curtis Samuel might lead it in raw yards.
You think so? What about touchdowns?
Keon Coleman.
Really?
Yeah, I think Keon Coleman's going to lead it in touchdowns. Yeah.
Is that so?
The contested accessibility in the end zone, I think is.
I think he's going to target.
I think he's going to have a red zone target number. I think he's going to have a lowish yards.
Yeah.
500 to 700, something there. Not crazy, but I think he will lead the team in receiving touchdowns. And from the receiver position, because that could also go to someone random like Knox or something.
Yeah, this would be the year that Knox would have like 9 touchdowns, like just randomly. So I didn't want to talk about tight ends, but I think we've kind of touched on the receiving roster a bit. But I do want to talk about Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox, if you're cool talking about that for a couple minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Where do you view Dalton Kincaid going forward? Do you view him as what he is right now, kind of, because he's not an elite blocker. I don't even really view him as a guy, unless they're in 12 personnel, who's just a tight end. I view him as a slot guy that can do some tight end stuff. Where do you view him going forward? Do you think that progressively he can turn into a top 10 tight end overall, or is he just going to be an elite pass catcher and an average tight end blocker, scheme fit? Like, what's your thoughts?
I think he's playing more tight end than I thought he would. Like, I originally thought he was the slot the slot receiver, and he's lined up in line a good amount last year, and I think it's only getting better. His blocking was better than I thought.
Towards the end of the year, he was. Towards the end of the year, he definitely improved.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of the interesting factor. He was in line 247 snaps last year, almost 50-50. So it's tough for me to only consider him a slot receiver when he had almost 300 inline snaps from a rookie.
Right.
So if you have 247 inline snaps from Dalton Kincaid last year as a rookie, they trusted him. So I don't think that's going to go down. Yeah. And then you obviously had 325 snaps from Dawson Knox in line. That's with missing week 8 to week 13 in there too. Yeah. So 12 personnel is on the fold. The Bills played it a bunch. And generally speaking, when they line up in 12 and they shift out of it, Kincaid will go to the slot there. So you can do different mismatches in terms from that position. So I think he's in line a lot. I think that his future is more in line than I originally had thought this time last year in May of 2023.
Yeah. What do you think the production that we're going to see? Because I don't think that it's going to go down. I think no matter how many receivers they bring in, I believe Dalton Kincaid was brought in to be a productive offensive weapon for Josh. And it seems like if that happens, what happens with Dawson Knox? Because if Dalton Kincaid, who's a first round pick, who you have fifth year rights to, is the guy that production wise is more effective, I guess, if you will, and for lack of term, than a Dawson Knox, you're not going to pay 2 tight ends, right? So what happens with Dawson Knox in a couple years? Is he just age out maybe anyways, where he's getting to a point where he's turning 30 and the Bills are going to look to get younger anyways, maybe draft another tight end at some point? Like what's your overall thoughts on, because they're not going to split target shares, I don't feel like. And I feel like there's still the trust factor that Josh has with Dawson because they've been together for so long, and they do have a great relationship on the field as far as the trust and all that stuff. So what's your thoughts on that? Like what happens with Dawson in the future?
I think they like him more than we want to admit. They redid his contract again. Yeah. He hasn't been paid the crazy amount that everyone thinks. He hasn't really seen much of that initial extension. He keeps cutting it. So ultimately, the Bills have one of the better tight end rooms in the league, whether we want to admit it or not, with Kincaid and Knox. It's really good. It's going to play a role in this. Their running back room is upgraded to me now with Ray Davis over some of those aging veterans. So I'm pretty excited for the fringe weapons. You want to call them fringe, the external weapons outside of receiver. But I think with Knox, I think he's ultimately going to be a factor in the red zone. They just don't have enough players to guard what the Bills have to offer with the bigger body receivers with Keon Coleman, maybe Matt Collins, Dawson Knox, and Dalton Kincaid. So that's why I go back to maybe they are looking more that why they did that is because they are looking maybe at that Deebo Samuel type of player if they did acquire somebody. So I think that with Knox specifically, he's going to be hard to guard in the red. People just don't have 2 tight ends that guard both the tight ends.
Right.
They don't have 2 linebackers, to guard the 2 tight ends.
I know what you meant.
Yeah.
So looking at how this Bills offense finished out the season, including the postseason, and how it's currently constructed. Again, we don't know what the future holds at the wide receiver position. If this is it, if the Bills are going to make a move, like you said, if there's smoke and then there's fire, like I'll say it this way. How do you feel if this is it and there's no moves made stacked up against last year's offense? Do you feel the Bills are a championship contender currently constructed on offense?
Always with 17. So I think that the way the one thing we didn't talk about offensively, the O-line, I think it's good. So they finished top 3 in a lot of metrics. They finished 8th in run blocking per the cumulative scores, 2nd in pass blocking, a cumulative score 4th overall in the O-line. They drafted their future center, in my opinion, that they probably had a much higher grade on. So I think the O-line returns 4 starters and a guy that was their 6th. So 5 out of their top 6 linemen last year with Van Pran, Granger, and with just a good plethora of backups that they have there now. It's a strength. So Josh Allen, in my opinion, with this O-line, I like Van DeMark. I like Alec Anderson. We'll see what Lyle Collins can do. Obviously Grable, their rookie. So I think that it's a good unit there. It's not a weakness. It's definitely a strength of the team. That combined with the running back room, combined with the tight end room, combined with, to me, still an average receiver room. But that is strong enough to be a Super Bowl with Josh Allen, a Super Bowl roster, the way that it's built. And I mean, I like what they were able to do defensively. I mean, I didn't think they'd be able to kind of repair safety. So just on an offensive side, though, I think that it's more than Super Bowl caliber, and maybe some upgrades in a lot of spots if they can have a true center that has came in, as well as be just as strong at the tackle position, the double tight ends for the whole season. I mean, you can argue that minus Diggs, there's upgrades all over this roster.
I agree with you 100% on offense. I feel like the running game is upgraded because you don't have to worry about 78-year-old Latavius Murray back there. You're always worried about issues with injuries with Damian Harris. So basically it was the James Cook show. Ty Johnson they brought back, which I think he's kind of in a sneaky small doses can be really effective. You look at the offensive line, like you said, if Van Pran works out, you have your future center for 10 years. Like I I honestly think that he's going to push Connor McGovern at the center position this year, which is fine. Then you move McGovern back to where he belongs at left guard.
Right.
But yeah, I agree with you. I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Spencer Brown if they're going to pick up an extension for him, because he's going to be the next one up, because he played remarkable. And me and Akeem talked all this past season. Like, if we're not talking about Spencer Brown, he's doing something right. If we're not mentioning him, every game, he's doing something right. So you could have bookend tackles for the next 5 years at least. So I agree with you on that front. I didn't want to get too much in the defensive side, but I feel like at linebacker, they're stronger than they were last year as far as depth.
For sure.
Safety, we were concerned, but I love the Bishop pickup. I think that's one guy. I think he's going to start week 1. If I'm being honest with you, he's going to push those guys, and he's going to be a week 1 starter.
Being traded was commenting on trading up for him. You don't trade up for a guy that you aren't going to start.
Exactly. So with all that said, with the wide receiver room, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I mean, I think, June 1st is only 4 weeks away. It's not as far off as everybody's thinking it is. It's 4 weeks away. And maybe something happens. Maybe Kev's right. Maybe where there's smoke, there's fire. And maybe we have a new wide receiver 1 come in here. And Josh has a new favorite target. So we'll see. Because then if you talk about you bring in a true number 1, and then you can develop Keon Coleman a little bit more at a pace that you'd like. Shakir picks up year 3. You have Curtis Samuel, who you could do with whatever you want. It opens up the playbook a lot more. And then you still have Dalton Kincaid. So it's going to be very interesting to see what Brandon Beane's got up his sleeve, if he's got something, in the works down the line. So, Kev, anything else you want to talk about with receivers or anything before we get out of here? Where can everybody find you on social media? And what night is Going Deep on?
Yeah, obviously you can find me at Kevin Massare. You can find me and on the Going Deep Buffalo show right here. As of this moment, Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Is our time slot. So 7 or 8, depending on where we'll be going, with the long summers now coming up. We're generally speaking 7 p.m., but we may push it back to the nice summer nights for everybody. We want to make sure everyone can still come and tune in. But you'll be able to find us Wednesdays right here in the evening, right at our usual slot, talking about all things like we talked about today. So looking forward to a good summer's worth of content. But on the receiver front, I think we talked about as much as we could. And I don't mean to say it one last time, but I don't know that the room is done yet. It seems like it could be the way it's positioned and the way everything's shaken out to be. I think they make a move. I really have had this belief that the way they drafted they had many opportunities to double dip. They had many opportunities to do a few things in free agency. I don't think just because they signed Quintez Cephas and Chase Claypool, those are the moves that they had tracking behind the draft choice. I think they were able to fill out their roster, and they're going to have an opportunity with the $10 million that Brandon Beane's not going to just stare at come June.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting because he could have done a lot of things with the draft capital. He could have moved up and got somebody that one of the top 3 in the draft. He could have done a lot of other things, but he hasn't. And he chose to do something that we haven't seen Brandon Beane do very often, is trade out of the first round. So very interesting. He let the Kansas City Chiefs go in front of him and take a guy that a lot of Bills fans wanted. So Brandon Beane knows what he's doing. He's working on something. So it's going to be very interesting. So thank you for joining me, Kev. It was fun to have you on, finally get you on the show.
Love it, man. Great.
Yeah. Going Deep Buffalo Wednesday nights, 7 or 8, depending on, what's going on. Built in Buffalo, follow us on all social media platforms. We're on YouTube. Obviously, if that's where you're watching us. We're on Facebook. We're on X. We are on TikTok. We're on Instagram. We're all over the place. Drop a like if you haven't already. Share this if you can. I'm Dave Myers, the founder of Built in Buffalo. Sorry, my computer froze there for a second. Founder of Built in Buffalo. I think that's it for me and Kev. You guys have a good weekend, and we'll see you during the week. As always, go Bills.